Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Genevieve St. Dennis. I'm the Director of Regulatory Policy in the Energy Resources Division of the BC Ministry of Energy Mines and Low Carbon Innovation. I'm here to present our presentation on carbon capture and storage, also known as CCS. You'll see in the title we've called this presentation CCS Carbon Capture and Storage 101. We've also referenced NEBC, or Northeast BC, as this is where CCS projects in the near future are expected to develop. Before I begin, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that I am grateful to live and work on the land of the Lekwungen people, known today as the Esquimalt and Songhees Nations. Also, thank you to our audience for joining us today as we present to you our high-level overview of carbon capture and storage. I'll be presenting with my colleague from the BC Energy Regulator, Ron Stefik. Ron is the Supervisor, Reservoir Engineering, responsible for the regulation of CCS projects. For closed captioning, please click on the CC at the bottom of your screen. Our agenda is divided into 3 sections. I will start with an overview of CCS to describe to you in general terms what is the technology. Then the second part of our presentation will be to explain the regulatory framework and how a CCS project is developed in BC. The third part of today's presentation will then be to share our experience with CCS in BC. I share the slides so you have a reference point for terms we'll be using throughout the slide presentation. You may want to return to it for further reference. Some terms I'd like to point out are BCER, meaning British Columbia Energy Regulator, CCS for carbon capture and storage, CO2 to reference carbon dioxide, MLE in reference to the Ministry of Energy Mines and Low Carbon Innovation, and NEBC for Northeast British Columbia. The figures you see here are based on official reports from 2020 by the Climate Action Secretariat of the BC Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, the Canada Energy Regulator, and the Government of Canada. Please notice that data is given in tons of carbon dioxide or CO2 equivalent. That's the E you see in the title of this slide. The term equivalent is a scientific metric measure used to compare the emissions from other greenhouse gases based on the global warming potential, or GWP. For example, the GWP of methane is 25. This means that emissions of 1 volume of methane is equivalent to 25 volumes of carbon dioxide. In 2020, the oil and gas sector in BC emitted 12.9 million tons of CO2 equivalent. This represents approximately 21% of all greenhouse gas emissions in the province. When we compare the CO2 volumes of BC related to Canada, it only counts for 9.3% of the total. And compared to the world, the total emissions of greenhouse gases of BC is just 0.13%. Now we move on to a breakdown of the greenhouse gas emissions in the oil and gas sector in BC for 2020. Carbon dioxide is the main greenhouse gas emission in the sector. It is a gas that CCS can be a tool to mitigate. However, you see that methane is still significant. This is why we have direct policy working at lowering specifically methane emissions. In the oil and gas sector, methane is released into the atmosphere when natural gas is incompletely combusted, vented, or leaked. The minor fraction named others includes volatile organic compound and nitrous oxide. So now focusing on the problem of carbon dioxide or CO2, this map is a snapshot of a map available online that is an interactive tool. It allows us to see all the large industrial facilities in BC that are sources of CO2. Large facilities are considered as those emitting more than 10,000 tons of CO2 annually. Facilities shown on this map, for example, include landfills, mines, pulp and paper mills, and oil and gas facilities. From the oil and gas sector, there are 2 main sources of CO2, formation CO2 from the production of natural gas, and CO2 that is exhausted from the combustion of natural gas. Formation CO2 from the production of natural gas is the CO2 that comes out of the ground with the natural gas. It's naturally occurring in the subsurface. it needs to be removed or stripped from the natural gas prior to the gas going into the pipelines. Currently, removed formation CO2 from the natural gas production is either vented or injected into a disposal well. In the production of natural gas, operators will use natural gas as a fuel for their own equipment. It is combusted to provide either heat or power along the production chain, so from wellhead to facility to pipeline. CO2 is a byproduct of this combustion. This CO2 is currently vented as flue gas. CO2 underground injection is not new. It was first used to enhance oil recovery, referenced in these slides as EOR. Enhanced oil recovery is a technique in oil extraction where CO2 is injected into mature oil fields to boost total oil production. Another type of CO2 injection we've seen for decades are cases where CO2 is in a mixture with hydrogen sulfide, or H2S. Hydrogen sulfide is a byproduct in some areas from raw oil and gas extraction. The combined gases are known as acid gases. Regulated to reduce sulfur dioxide emissions from flaring of the hydrogen sulfide, industry turned to acid gas disposal, the disposal of it into deep geological formations. This practice has been in place since the 1990s. This slide also speaks to the history of carbon capture and storage, or CCS projects, where we have the disposal of just carbon dioxide. These have been operating in Alberta and Saskatchewan now for more than a decade. My apologies for this slide. We made it as big as we could, but it still may be hard to read. Carbon capture and storage, CCS, can also sometimes be referred to as carbon capture utilization and storage, CCUS, when the captured CO2 is used as an input into new substances like concrete or chemicals, or even carbon fiber material. Our focus today, however, is on the storage side. CCS is a process that involves capturing carbon dioxide at its source and storing it permanently deep underground. The CCS process consists of three main steps. 1. Capturing and separating the CO2 from gaseous products, such as from combustion or directly from the atmosphere with technologies like direct air capture. 2. Compressing and transporting the captured CO2 to the storage locations. And 3, injecting the CO2 into an underground geological formation. You can follow this process in the graphic. Also important to note, conventionally, CO2 is counted as the weight of 1,000 kilograms or 1 ton, which under normal conditions occupies a volume of 556 metric meters. For CCS, CO2 gas pressurized and is injected at this high pressure into the deep geological formations. It is important to mention this as the pressure is so high, the CO2 becomes almost a liquid, and the original volume reduces to only 1.89 cubic meters, or 0.3% of the volume under normal conditions. In other words, there is a large reduction of the volume when CO2 is pressurized. In simple terms, if you have 300 units at the surface, you have approximately only 1 unit stored. CO2 under this condition is called supercritical fluid. The geological formations where CO2 is injected are deep, very deep. These formations must have three main characteristics: capacity, injectivity, and containment. Questions asked are, is there enough capacity to store large volumes of CO2? Is there good injectivity to match the expected rate of injection? And will there be safe containment to avoid any leakage of CO2 back to the surface? The second section is about our provincial policy and regulatory framework for CCS. BC has a strong and comprehensive CCS regulatory framework in place. In this diagram, we can see the CCS development process from the exploration stage through to the post-closure phase. In summary, the Ministry issues tenure for CCS in the form of either an exploration storage reservoir license, a storage reservoir license, or a petroleum and natural gas lease. These licenses and leases are given under the Petroleum and Natural Gas Act and its regulations. The BC Energy Regulator, or BCER, issues permits for CCS activities. For example, wells and associated CCS development activities under the Energy Resource Activities Act and its regulations. These activities include developing and permitting, operations, closure, and post-closure. Now let's go through the stages of a CCS project in more detail, starting with a few words about consultation and engagement. There is an extensive engagement, consultation, and notification process that occurs throughout the application processes and throughout the life cycle of a storage reservoir. This illustration gives a high-level map of the engagement and consultation process at the application stage for tenure and permitting of a CCS project. All proponents should engage with Indigenous nations, local and regional governments, landowners, and right holders before any applications are submitted. It is important that proponents maintain continuous engagement, good communication, and address concerns with all affected parties, including the Ministry and BCER. This engagement should begin as early as possible before any application process begins and include details of the storage reservoir project. Once a tenure or license application is received by the Ministry, EMLI, referrals are sent out by EMLI to Indigenous nations, other ministries, and local and regional governments. The referral results and review of the application include consideration on whether the development and use of the proposed storage reservoir could have effects on an Indigenous nation and on the public interest in granting or refusing the grant of the lease or license. We'll look at further slides about tenuring in a few minutes. On this slide, it is important to note that proponents must secure subsurface tenure rights or licenses from EMLI before they start the application process with the BCER to develop and operate the storage reservoir. However, the issuance of a lease or a license does not necessarily mean that a storage reservoir development will occur. Prior to any permitting application being submitted for new or amended activity, or the filing of an order application, the proponent engages with First Nations and impacted landowners, residents, and right holders. As stipulated in the requirements for consultation and notification regulation, proponents must consult and notify landowners and/or right holders prior to submitting an activity application to the BCER and make arrangements with surface rights agreements. The Farmer Information Service is an excellent resource for residents requiring more information about the regulatory aspects of energy resource activity. Once the permitting or order application is received by the BCER consults with Indigenous nations. The BCER will perform a thorough application review. An application to develop and operate a storage reservoir through a Section 75 special project order also triggers a notice on the BCER website. This notice is to receive any feedback from the area's subsurface tenure stakeholders. All consultation and feedback is considered in the decision to issue a permit or order, or not to. We'll get into details of considerations for special project orders in a further slide. Let's look now at more details about tenuring. There are two ways to obtain tenure for CO2 storage under the Petroleum and Natural Gas Act, or PNGA. The first way is to get a PNG lease. This is done by going through Part 6 or Section 71 of the Act. The second way to secure tenure is to get a storage reservoir license. This is done through Section 130 of the Act. We look at the first option here on this slide, tenuring through a PNG lease. When an operator already has a petroleum and natural gas lease, this lease can be used to store CO2 that is the result of an oil and gas activity. When a lease is about to expire, and the company wants to continue storing CO2, it can if a special project order for disposal is in place or to support planning for future storage or disposal of CO2. Now let's get into storage reservoir licenses and storage reservoir exploration licenses. There is a difference between a license, which I'll explain in this slide, and a lease, which was discussed in the previous slide. With a storage reservoir license, an operator can store CO2 from any source, not just CO2 from oil and gas operations. To apply for a storage reservoir license, a proponent submits a detailed application about the intended project and specifics about the storage activities. The proponent may have this information from work they've done previously, perhaps under a PNG lease, or they've acquired it from another party. When a proponent does not have sufficient information to proceed directly with storage reservoir license, they may first start with an exploration project stage. At this stage, the proponent explores for potential sites for storing CO2, and they build their understanding of the site's characteristics. To explore, proponents apply under Section 126 of the PNGA for a storage reservoir exploration license. All the information obtained from the work done under the exploration license can be used to apply for a storage reservoir license at a later date. I should highlight that recently, the Petroleum and Natural Gas Storage Reservoir Regulation was updated to set out more clearly this process. The Ministry is also preparing guideline documentation to support this regulation. This diagram illustrates the tenuring process for CO2 storage. Once the proponent submits an application, our tenuring staff at the Ministry review the application internally. If it is sufficiently comprehensive, the request is distributed as a referral. Referrals are sent out to First Nations, provincial ministries, and local and regional governments. At the end of the referral period, all comments are analyzed and a decision is made about the tenuring. The proponents now can request permits from the BC Energy Regulator for further development of the CCS project. We'll now hear from the BCER more about the special project life cycle for a CCS project and other phases of CCS development.
Hello, this is Ron Staffick with the BC Energy Regulator. This diagram illustrates the Energy Resources Activity Act Section 75 Special Project Order process for a storage reservoir. Once a CCS proponent secures subsurface tenure rights from the Ministry, then the proponent must submit an application to the BCER, signed by a licensed professional engineer or geoscientist, which follows the published Carbon Dioxide Subsurface Storage Application Guide. The application must include scientific data, test results, and modeling, which supports the suitability of the wells and reservoir for this purpose. The application proposes ongoing measurement and monitoring to verify deep sequestration of the injected CO2. As noted in the previous slide, a notice of the application is posted to the BCER website to solicit potential feedback from area subsurface tenure stakeholders. A multidisciplinary team of BCER professionals reviews the application and provides input on a decision. If approved, the approval document contains numerous specific conditions for operation, monitoring, measurement, testing, and reporting. A CCS project is subject to site inspections and enforcement of regulation throughout its entire life cycle, including eventual closure. Measurement, monitoring, and verification, MMV, is a term commonly applied to CCS projects. An MMV plan ensures no adverse harms occur from the operation of the project, and the CO2 is verified to be sequestered for geologic time. The MMV plan includes the gathering of initial baseline data for comparison both over the active injection life and following. Examples of MMV data include continuous well casing annulus pressure monitoring, monthly well injection volume, pressure, and temperature reporting, annual reservoir pressure testing, etc. Following the end of the injection phase of a CCS project, data continues to be obtained until sufficient to ensure the CO2 will stabilize in a state which is reliably sequestered. Requirements are based on the site-specific conditions. Wells are finally decommissioned or plugged in a manner to ensure subsurface integrity remains intact. What do CCS projects look like? Here are some examples in renderings and photos of various parts of CCS projects. Starting on the left corner and moving clockwise, first we have an artist rendering of a direct air capture facility. The large system shown here is designed by Squamish, BC-based company Carbon Engineering. Then we have a photo of a CO2 capture unit. That's the taller tower part in the photo, part of a biomass energy plant in Japan. Next, we have a photo of a CO2 injection well located near Clive, Alberta, as part of an enhanced oil recovery project that uses CO2 to produce more oil from a mature oil field. The last photo is from a CCS project called Aquastore, located near Estevan, Saskatchewan. The picture shows a small shed that houses metering equipment that measures the volume of CO2 injected. Not shown in these images are the buried pipelines that connect various components from source to injection of a CCS project. We will now move a little bit closer to home and discuss CCS projects in British Columbia. As noted in an earlier slide, deep injection of CO2 has been ongoing in the province since 1996 in the form of acid gas disposal. This has occurred in both depleted gas pools and deep saline aquifers, the same targets expected for most CCS projects. Of the 18 wells approved for acid gas disposal, 8 are currently active, injecting approximately equal amounts of CO2 and hydrogen sulfide. The data and experience gathered during the injection of over 2.7 megatons of CO2 have demonstrated decades of safe operation and oversight capability of the BCER. The 2.7 megatons of cumulative CO2 injection in BC is on a comparable scale to major CCS projects around the world. However, the rate of injection of the relatively newer CCS dedicated projects will soon overshadow the cumulative volume that has gone into existing BC disposal wells. The BCER has developed a live tracking dashboard to monitor both the performance and regulatory compliance of deep disposal wells. This publicly available data source ensures transparency of operations and demonstrates regulatory oversight. These data plots also predict the remaining storage capacity in the reservoir being injected into to allow future planning. A similar dashboard will be available for CCS projects. British Columbia hosts numerous sedimentary basins with a range of suitability for CCS projects. A large body of knowledge exists for the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin, located in the northeast, due to the wells drilled for oil and gas. Other basins require further study to properly evaluate the suitability for CCS. CCS injection, as close as possible to the point of capture, is expected to be key to a viable project. Two publications characterize geologic suitability for CCS in British Columbia. A high-level review is provided in the atlas published by the Plains CO2 Reduction Partnership, of which the BCER is a member. This is shown on the left. Geoscience BC in January of 2023 published the Northeast BC Geological Carbon Capture and Storage Atlas, providing detailed data on the known deep saline aquifers and depleted oil and gas pools, which may be suitable for CCS. This specific information guides proponents to CCS geologic opportunities. The extensive data from oil and gas drilling and operations has provided a wealth of data to evaluate CCS opportunities in Northeast BC. Target formations for dense phase storage must be at least 800 meters deep to reach conditions of temperature and pressure that will maintain CO2 in that high density condition. There are 1,200 depleted oil and gas pools in the province that may be suitable for CO2 storage, and a further over 1,800 pools not yet depleted that provide further opportunities. Wells associated with these pools are in various life stages, from fully decommissioned to current active producers. Deep saline aquifers, far below the depth of usable fresh water, have been used for produced saltwater disposal by the oil and gas industry for many decades and represent further significant storage capacity for CO2. The result of this mapping and evaluation work has identified extensive CO2 storage capacity in the various formations in depth in both depleted pools and saline aquifers. This is highly encouraging for multiple CCS projects to occur with a long life for meaningful emissions mitigation. In addition to deep CO2 injection from point source emitters, there is ongoing technology developments to support other types of CCS projects. As mentioned, direct air capture of CO2 from the atmosphere is being advanced by multiple proponents. Other pilot projects would lock CO2 into cement and concrete products. Injection and storage of CO2 in volcanic basalt formations or mine tailings is being investigated. Subsurface methane pyrolysis is a potential process to generate hydrogen, which leaves the carbon in the subsurface. And CCS via injection of water containing dissolved CO2, like a soda drink, into suitable formations is being tested. There is potential for these types of projects to be proposed in British Columbia. Now, to summarize the regulatory aspects of CCS. The Canadian government has recognized British Columbia as having policies and regulation in place to effectively manage CCS in the province, enabling projects to qualify for the federal CCUS investment tax credit. The BCER has extensive regulatory experience with similar projects and has identified significant CO2 geologic storage capacity. The provincial government and the BCER has and will continue to work closely with academia, researchers, First Nations, communities, and standards organizations to ensure CCS projects occur in a responsible manner. Initial projects are expected to be of modest scale based on point source emissions in known geologically favorable areas that do not require significant pipelines for CO2 transportation. Research and development work on new CCS technology is ongoing worldwide to foster this potential global warming mitigation. We have now reached the end of this presentation. Should you have any questions on the regulation of carbon capture and storage, we can be contacted at the email address shown on the screen, reservoir, RESERVOIR, at bc-er.ca. Thank you for joining us.